the fight against COVID is this issue of monitoring, surveillance, detection, and prevention. So you will have seen, I think it's the Worldometer, where Johns Hopkins University and among other organizations like the US Center for Disease Control, World Health Organizations, and others, basically what they've been doing is they've been mapping all these infections, where they are, what the dates are, the deaths, so that it gives you a visual representation of what's happening globally around the world with regards to this scourge. And one of the things that I found interesting was, one of the things was about this whole idea of touch-free versus technology, facial recognition. You've been seeing things like thermal imaging. I think China was using a lot of that, where you had biometric border screening so that you don't have to get the individual in front with a gun to test the temperature, because that guy is also exposed if they don't have a mask. One of the other things that I was looking at, and China, I think, used a lot of this, was about facial recognition and tracing, deep learning, looking at the behavior and movement of different individuals. So individuals basically with using mobile technology, individuals who are being tracked to know who is obeying the quarantine, who is not obeying the quarantine. If you move within a certain distance from your flat, the state would be notified. They would call you randomly. They would send you messages and alerts as to who else was in your neighborhood that got infected. So there's been a lot of technology that has been deployed in the West. But my thinking around innovation, and maybe Kenneth, you might be able to you might have a view on this one, is that sometimes Western companies tend to over-engineer. We tend to over-engineer products just to make them perfect, make sure that they do everything, make sure that they last forever. And one of the things we've talked in the past, especially with my startups, is this idea of jugaad innovation. So basically a frugal, inclusive approach to solving problems innovatively. One of the things, this comes from India. I think it was put forward by Professor Jaideep Prabhu. His book is Jugaad Innovation: Think Frugal, Be Flexible, Generate Breakthrough Through Growth. So essentially, you're looking at overcoming harsh constraints by improving effective solutions with limited resources. Now, I posted on my Facebook page a few days ago about a guy in Ghana who had come up using a drum, our traditional drum, that had sensors where if you brought your hands closer to the sensor, it would drop soap first and foremost. So you don't touch anything basically. It drops soap and it would keep beeping until 20 seconds after you've washed your hands. Then it will give you water, making sure that people are, they're sanitizing properly. So that's the power of social media. I shared it on one WhatsApp group, and on that WhatsApp group is another friend of mine who has friends who are from Ghana, and he shared it on that WhatsApp group. And one of the guys, actually, who is a bank manager with Prudential, knows the guy. Apparently, the guy was his customer. So he went and checked out his product. And now they're in discussions with the bank to kind of bring that technology forward. So social media is really very powerful. And specifically for us, Africa in particular, these innovations don't have to be complex and cost billions of dollars. We can use the DIY mindset, use things like jugaad innovation to look at affordable, aspirational. Make sure that you're going you're coming up with products and services using minimal resources and going as quickly as possible to the market. So, your thoughts on jugaad innovation versus all these big technologies, Kenneth?
All right, Dennis, thank you very much for that intro. And yeah, you shared some very interesting thoughts. I hope everyone can hear me clearly. So could you just kindly just re-clarify the specific questions, my thoughts on the purchase of the goods that you mentioned?
No. So the what are your thoughts on how this data, how basically looking at the way in which technology is being deployed, especially around data and all this big data and around all these big innovations versus our normal local technologies that people are using to beat COVID-19. I'm trying to look at the significance of technology and innovation in this fight against COVID-19. And often you find that people think of these big solutions, big budget technologies versus our drums and basic stuff that people are using back home in Africa. What are your thoughts on that?
No, I think definitely if there is anything that this COVID experience has taught us is that they need the importance to be self-reliant. Because you'll notice that most of the countries that have closed their borders, and for countries like Uganda, where I am, which is landlocked, that may have posed a bigger issue than it has, and I'll explain why shortly. But most other countries that are landlocked, a few that have been pointed out as those that are success stories. The reasons why is, one, because they are deploying technology or trying to deploy technology in whatever manner that they can. But number two, most of them, of course, also acted quickly. Like Uganda, we closed our airports quite swiftly enough. Most of the ministries, or all the ministries, I saw a letter or guidance that was issued by the Ministry of ICT urging all government entities to use video platforms or video call platforms, which was really good. And of course, the private sector had already embraced that. Most of us were already having meetings virtually, even before the Ministry of ICT gave guidance on that. So in terms of continuance, that has been a very big plus. Then on the side of manufacturing, especially using the examples that you gave, one of the biggest worries that we had was, how will we get essential supplies into Uganda, especially if the borders are closed? As you all know, most of Uganda depends mostly on Kenya and Tanzania to be able to get its imports in. Now, if the borders are closed, of course, our governments are working together, and cargo is now moving freely across the borders with clear standard operating procedures. But one of the key things that the government did was to urge the manufacturing community to consider reworking some of their tools, reworking some of their models to be able to create or to come up, especially with the equipment that would help medical workers throughout this whole time. And we were discussing, I think 2 or 3 days ago, we saw that UMA, the chair lady or chairperson of UMA, that's Barbara Mulwana, had rallied, her company, which is nice, had partnered with Nitel to be able to create plastic, what do you call that? The protective gear that the frontline medical personnel will be using to be able to treat patients. Now, in the past, of course, whenever something like that would come up, everyone would be talking about quality. What is the quality of this particular product? But now, if you even on social media, no one is talking about that, but they're actually uploading and saying, okay, maybe it's true we can make some of these things on our own. And especially now, because since technology has bridged the gap really across every single sector, even in the manufacturing sector, in a sense that even the materials now, like the protective gear, I saw a photo of a mask that is meant to protect workers, and we're told that it fits the specific the actual specifications of the World Health Organization, and that is the same thing with the masks and all the other innovations that have come up. So that was, for me, a real eye opener, because I was among the skeptics at first, thinking, okay, how is this actually going to work? But it's already working. There are lots of local companies. I was discussing with Safe Border and the Capero Foundation, who are piloting their 1 million masks campaign, and all those masks are going to be sourced locally, and they conform with the specifications that the World Health Organization has given. Same thing with sanitizer. There's a friend of mine, an OB as well, using the same example that you gave. It's called Aaron Musmenta, and So we went to Ontario together, and he creates products from bees. And again, I also had a discussion with him, and some of the products that he creates are sanitizers, which are now on the market. And there are lots of other products now. Even now, I bought just this sanitizer. This is what I'm using at home. But in the past, if I went to the supermarket, all I'll be seeing would be foreign products. But now, especially for sanitizers, I'm seeing more locally made products, and they work. So I think what COVID has done with all its devastation and everything it has caused, on the positive side, I think, especially for countries that are using this experience or trying to use it positively to spur innovation, to spark creativity, I think we are moving in the right direction. And as long as the governments are supporting innovators, then I think we will be able to come out of this not unscathed, but perhaps perhaps better.
Now, it's interesting you should talk about government and innovators. By the way, my view on this is that this is only going to help the speed with which technology is going to be taken up in Africa. So today we have Davis Namara. Davis is a good friend of mine, and I know that he's an entrepreneur himself, and they have quite a number of products. But one of his products is Safe App, which I think they're using to try and track down what's happening with the medical space. But we also have Dr. Ruth Obaikol. Dr. Ruth is the Deputy Director of the Academy for Health Innovations and Impact in Uganda. And I know that you have, I think it's a Call for Life, a tool for helping surveillance. One of the things that has been very challenging, and I found myself reflecting upon this, is with all this technology that is happening in the West, the speed with which we identify who has got COVID-19, tracking and tracing who they've been in contact with. So technology has been used a lot. So perhaps from Davis's point of view and Ruth's point of view, maybe let's start with Davis. Davis, do you want to share some thoughts about your app and how does it work? I've just had a very good look at the app. It's actually a very good app. But maybe for our viewers who have not, who don't know about this, what is your app? What are the aspirations, and how can people use it?
Thank you very much, Dennis. My app is our app is called Safe App. We have a company called Safe Africa. We have been on this for a long time. Originally, we are trying to develop an app that can help the government mitigate the problem of insecurity. You know, there were a lot of robberies and a lot of killing people that was going on some time back. And the reporting process to the authorities was a bit of slow, or even not there, because the 99 function, the 991 function, was it the 99 function was not working very well. So we came up with an idea. So what if we create an app? So someone can download that app, they fill in their details. If they notice any kind of insecurity, robbery or something, they can be able to alert the authorities, and the authorities can be able to get that alert instantly. And of course, it's integrated with Google Maps. You can get a 95% location accuracy using Google Maps. So when COVID-19 came in, we quickly integrated the COVID function. So whereby it's the same thing. You can download the app, put in your details, put in your email, put in your number. It's basically a social responsibility app. Now, if you identify a person who has COVID or who's sick or who has the symptoms, you can fill in that you see I've identified the person, or myself. It is self-reporting. I feel like this. I have cough. I have a headache. All those guidelines they gave us that which show that someone has the symptoms, and then immediately you alert. So when you alert, there's a responder app which is supposed to be with the authorities, and they can receive that alert immediately. And the beauty with it is that it is decentralized. So what am I saying? If there's a response team in Karamoja, Kabare, wherever, yeah, they are able to get those alerts and they can respond immediately, either by a call or coming to see you. That is that's on the side of the alert, and also it has on the side of reporting. We can get instant messages from the ministry. We can get the presidential guidelines in terms of notifications all the time. Maybe say let's say in the city center, we can notify you, please avoid this place. There's a case that has been identified. It's amazing.
That's really brilliant.
That's basically about yeah.
Good. That's brilliant, because one of the things about things like Jugad innovation or innovations of this type is, I noticed you had originally done the app for something else, but you very quickly adapted it to this one. That's really one of those key things about innovation, that rather than reinvent the wheel, there's lots of technologies that are out there that people could very quickly redeploy to, and I talked about this last week as well, to other things. Maybe perhaps Ruth, I don't know whether you want to come in and talk about the Call for Life tool. Is it similar to the Safe Act that Davis is talking about, or is yours slightly different? Because one of the challenges with technologies is that sometimes you could have technology that works maybe only on iPhones or Android phones, and yet we know that our people only use things, the small communities, like our president apparently only uses the community. So I know there are things like U-Report, have you ever heard of U-Report, or the Situation Room, kind of things that use SSCG. So do you want to share some more light about the Call for Life tool?
Yes, it's kind of similar to Davis's, but the approach is a bit different. So Call for Life is also a tool that has been adapted from what the Academy for Health Innovations has been doing with IDI. It's a tool that has been used to improve adherence for HIV patients or clients who have been attending a clinic, giving them notifications and of helping them to report the symptoms that they're having daily, but also giving them health tips. So we're adapting this to help the Ministry of Health in contact follow-up. So currently, as we know, as of yesterday, the Director General shared with us that we've had cumulatively over 4,000 cases that the Ministry of Health has been dealing with in terms of tracking, follow-up, and what they've been doing is physical follow-up. So they attach one person to 10 people per day, and this person should go out probably in a car fueled with a driver and all. We calculated that you probably need over $2.5 per day per person just to follow them up. So this tool, Call for Life, is an interactive voice response tool. It's web-based, and it simply helps. What we've designed it to do is to help track symptoms. So if we have 4,000 people, we could easily send them voice prompts, prompt them every day. Do you have fever? Do you have cough? Do you have sore throat? Do you have difficulty in breathing? And then we receive that information on a dashboard, and we can now have, instead of following up 4,000 people, you can have a targeted response. And I think this tool is going to be very important moving forward. In case this picture that we're seeing becomes larger or bigger, then we can actually focus resources to where it matters the most. So we hope that that's the kind of contribution. Should be able to cut costs by over 80% if as Ugandans we join the effort and we're part of this response, and then use this tool to fill that gap.
That's really fantastic, because from this example alone, and I don't know whether Davis and Ruth, whether you want to have a discussion after this, but I wondered, because the aggregation of, and big data is very important in all this information being aggregated. are you working separately from the same, or are you working from the same database that Davis might have access to? Is there like an open source of some sort where all this information is aggregated so that you can collect your data with Davis's data, with Akol's data, with Acheng's data, with Aguma's data? So if there's 10 startups all trying to track the same thing, is there a central database where all this data is collected?
Actually, the Academy has been trying to make sure that we're working with the Ministry of Health. So our data will be feeding into the Ministry of Health. So every data we have is pushed into Acheng's data. It's not separate,
but is that open sourced? Is that available for the likes of Davis to collaborate and tap into?
I think we're open to discussing with Davis, and integration and interoperability are very key for us. And I was really excited to hear what Davis was doing, and hopefully we can actually have a chat after this. Lots to learn from him, and good to integrate, and possibly also direct him to come and be part of the team and feed into the Ministry of Health.
Fantastic. So Davis, I'll be sending my bill for my commission in due course. But now back to Kenneth. One of the things that we've been looking at is smart technology. I know that in the past, when you and I have talked in Kampala, we've talked about artificial intelligence, big data, and all these. So about 3 years ago, I run these conferences in Uganda, the LEAP conference for entrepreneurial students. And one of the themes was about AI, big data, Internet of Things. And the feedback I got was that, you know what, Dennis, some of these things you're talking about, they're just too alien, keep it simple on the ground. And I took that feedback on board. But right now, if you see how whatever's happening around the world, the countries that are dealing with this efficiently and effectively are using artificial intelligence, big data, because the pandemic, the nature of it is that there is a lot of data points everywhere in terms of the location of the individuals who have this infection, their movements, the variety of symptoms, deaths, and so on. So there's too much data to make sense of in such a pandemic. I mean, I was just looking at countries like China, the way they were using huge CT scans, blockchain companies. This is another thing that we've talked about. Blockchain companies and pharmacies delivering patients' medications on their doorsteps. Robots and drones are delivering foods and medicine in different places. So one of the things that is happening as well, and I know this is maybe an area that you might have an opinion on, is the battle on social media. So some of this information is coming from social media, and with that comes misinformation. And I know that Google this week is putting down lots of videos that are spreading all this information about 5G lies and so on and so forth. And back to the issue of big data and surveillance, one of the challenges has been around civil liberties. China was very good at tracking people because through WeChat or everyone's mobile phone, they have all this information. They know who you are, where you live, what you bought. So they're using it for two ways. One, to obviously control the spread, but also to reward people who are abiding by the quarantine measures, and of course, trying to track and punish those who are not. And that has impacted on civil liberties, because before COVID-19 came, you had technology being used in Hong Kong when you had all these riots, and facial technology was being used, and then these young guys were instead using masks so as to mess the technology about. But now some of the technologies that were being used to try and see beyond the mask, to still identify the individuals, are the same technologies being redeployed, let's say in China, to identify these individuals, because now they need the mask for health purposes, but you still need to know who they are. So, but you're still tracking people, and that has civil liberty implications. Yourself as a lawyer, what are your thoughts on the benefits versus the costs of this big data and surveillance?
Dennis, you've asked me a question that has kept me up very many nights, especially since this whole COVID pandemic broke out. Okay, maybe first I will first give the viewers context. So currently, most of the countries in the world have either enacted or are going to enact laws that govern data protection and privacy. Most constitutions all over the world already recognize privacy and data protection as human rights, or some fall short of calling them human rights, but call them essential rights. Some have even seen them, I've seen privacy as a non-derogable right as well. Those are some states. In particular, there's actually a paper that I wrote where I was looking at a case from India, where the right to privacy was seen as a fundamental human right. That was a Supreme Court case, I think passed in 2012 or thereabout. I'm not sure about the exact year. So, and of course, in Europe, UK as well, you've seen the GDPR. In Africa, we've seen the African Union Convention on Cybersecurity and Personal Data Protection. And of course, as I mentioned, most states now have standalone data protection acts or laws, like Uganda, where we have a data protection act. So that really just gives you a broad picture to see that, that the world is actively looking at data and privacy. Moving on to the second thing. So from that particular aspect, I think the reason why the world has seen privacy as, and data protection, or has been seeing those two as very, very key issues, is because of one in particular. Most people have heard about the issues with Facebook and Cambridge Analytica, where Cambridge Analytica is or was a data mining company that accessed whether authorized or unauthorized data for users, and they use that data to, or allegedly use the data to influence elections, and some close in Kenya. Here there were allegations that Cambridge Analytica had a hand in the last elections, and also perhaps had a hand in targeting ads that mudslinged a few opponents. That was the same thing in Nigeria, where there were rumors that Buhari had died, and of course in the US with Trump and Hillary. So such incidents have really propelled data and privacy to the forefront. And of course, then when you have the issues of the Snowden leaks and other data breaches, data protection and privacy has been on everyone's mind. Now, in relation to COVID, of course, as you pointed out, most countries are utilizing technology to be able to either detect, prevent, and even cure those that are unfortunate enough or unlikely to contract COVID. Now, in China in particular, I was looking up clips and the news where they were showing how they're utilizing their surveillance cameras to be able to check the body temperature of passengers. Now, of course, whenever you're looking at such things, I believe, and this one I have to state very clearly, there are rights in our constitutions that are non-derogable. And even in states of emergency, even in times of pandemics, I do believe that the particular rights that cannot or should not be alienated or removed. Now, in instances when you have a pandemic, of course, what China is doing now is a step in the right direction in terms of using technology to be able to stop the further spread of such a very dangerous disease. The risk or the issue or question comes up then, what happens after that is done? Will they continue doing that? What happens to all the data that has been collected, especially since most of that data has been collected without consent? For most of our laws, any data that is collected, especially personal data, has to be collected with the consent of the data subject. So consent is a very big issue. But the exceptions are, you can throw consent out of the window, out of the door, if you have if you have public emergencies, if the stake of a particular, if the citizens of a particular country are at risk, or even the world, and a pandemic honestly falls within that particular category of where you need perhaps to reach out and use citizens' data without their consent, but for the good of the public. But when that happens, I honestly also still believe that because most of the laws still have principles of data protection. One of those is collecting data that is minimal, and also ensuring that data is collected for the purpose for which it is intended.
Yeah.
Now,
Yeah.
I do believe that even when governments should be allowed to use data, or even the Chinese government is right in utilizing the surveillance cameras to be able to curb the spread of COVID, the data that is collected has to be used in the manner or for the manner for which it is collected. It would be very unfortunate to hear that perhaps that the data that is being used in citizens continues after whatever lockdown period has been lifted, and you're seeing that maybe that data is now being shared either with security agencies or with financial entities, also again without the consent of data subjects. That would be a breach. And if anyone's data is used for that purpose and they then found out, they would definitely have a cause of action against any government that did that. So I would say that yes, we're still living in a time where data protection and privacy are still considered as very key to our well-being. And but the other thing that perhaps we should also look at, there's an author that I like, that is Noah Yuval. And I quote him a lot, perhaps overquote him, but it's because every time I read his work, it really opens my mind. So he was talking about the social order, and he was saying that for most of us, or for most of our societies, we are how we are, and we accept the laws we accept the culture, we accept the things that we do because of the collective. He calls it the imagined social order, in the sense that all of us collectively agree to certain norms, cultures, and those particular norms and culture. The reason why they become norms and culture is because the social order, everyone, the collective has assented or has conceded to those becoming the rules that apply. Now, as we're watching now, even in Uganda, because there were questions as to whether a president should have issued a state of emergency, as compared to the statutory instruments that were issued to be able to put most of these directives into effect. But if you notice, the discussion is now really not on whether we should have locked down, whether we should have done all these things. That is now a no-brainer. These things, all these measures were important, and that's why you saw the World Health Organization mentioning Uganda in particular as one of the countries that were commended for their responsiveness to that, and the Minister of Health, of course, yes. But now, on the flip side, so in regards to issues of privacy, we're all accepting and saying, look, even now, I'm seeing passport details are being shared freely. I'm seeing details about patients are shared freely, national ID details, because of course, like in Uganda at the moment, they're asking if you're an essential worker, you have to have a sticker. For you to have a sticker, you need to provide your personal details and personal information. And of course, I don't think that we're following the principles of data protection and privacy as stringently as we should. But I said because we have all agreed that these restrictions are important for our own good. And most of us are giving out our privacy or our data for free for purposes of what? Of ensuring that I am kept safe, my family is kept safe, my friends are kept safe. So, but I think, or my view is that should only be during, times like this. So we still need to be careful. Yes, Dennis? We still need to be careful with how the data is collected, especially after the lockdown is lifted, after COVID goes, what happens to the data? And that's why I think the principles of data protection are very instructive, because they're very clear, data should be kept for short periods of time, for particular reasons. I think those will still apply.
Yeah, it's very interesting you should talk about data, because I've been on a number of WhatsApp groups, especially, where I have tried to highlight the data breaches, quoting, of course, the general data protection laws here in Europe. And of course, most of my friends are like, Dennis, this is Uganda. People that have died and their details are being shared, and all sorts of things. But back to this sense of collective, all of us collectively agreeing that the state is acting in our best interest, and therefore we should give up some of those civil liberties. I think the extent to which people are giving up that varies differently. So in countries maybe that previously where data protection was never a big issue, never respected anyway, it's now free for all. But even here, the, the principles, the basic principles would still apply. But now, maybe it brings me to another topic, which is where I wanted to bring in James Beronda. James, are you there? I can see you, but you're muted. James,
sorry, Dennis. Before that, you had asked about the fake news issue. I don't know whether you want me to answer that, or I can just answer it later after James speaks.
Go on, answer it.
Yes, I just remembered it because on the issue of fake news, well, it does tie into data because most times what we share actually does have personal information of individuals. And as I told you, we have clear laws in Uganda. Of course, we have the Data Protection and Privacy Act, we have the Computer Misuse Act, we have the Different Transactions Act. We have very robust legislation on that, and especially even on fake news. We have laws on defamation, and most of the news that we share, whether it's on WhatsApp, whether it's on Facebook, whether we're only forwarding posts. I am aware that there is a case in the High Court of Uganda, which was passed in March, actually, just right before this broke out, where Justice Musa Sekana clearly, I will perhaps send the link and the viewers may be able to see it. But Justice Sekana was very clear. I think actually it's important for me to read the actual court because he was saying that in regards to data, sorry, to online defamation. Sorry if my video is off. I just want to read for you the exact quote and exactly, yes. So in that particular instance, he was looking at online defamation, and he was saying that when it comes, he says each time the originator of a defamatory statement repeats it, he publishes it anew. Each publication, therefore, a fresh cause of action arises. Not only is the author of a defamatory statement liable, but also those who repeat it. This is the one that made me smile. Tale-bearers are as bad as tale-makers. Now that is as apt as it can be in the sense that whether you're just reporting, giving Mugambo, verify. There's a video that I shared on my social media, which was a BBC clip about fake news, and they were showing how easy it is to reach 3 million people in a matter of hours. In a matter of minutes, because if you share something in a group, I'll have maybe 20 people in a group. One of those or all of those people will share them with other groups and so on and so forth. And the chain will continue. And the impact is great because one, not only will the people that are tasked with ensuring that the right information reaches the public, then try to concentrate on trying to stop or prevent the further spread of that fake news. And that then hampers the efforts of those health workers or of those people that would then otherwise be using or putting their efforts to something else. But it also, of course, one, if you're dealing with data protection, sometimes you're dealing with personal information that people are sharing freely, which is criminal. So sharing of fake news is criminal. I'm glad that most entities or most governments have come up to actually criticize this. UCC in Uganda did. The ED Erin Nasewankambo from UCC and her team recently issued a clear warning to anyone, especially media and news stations, stopping them from reporting things that the Ministry of Health has not sanctioned. But secondly, also stopping social media users and blog users and arrests from sharing or disseminating information that is fake and that has much larger implications that perhaps we may foresee. Because from the comfort of our homes or offices, you can just get your phone and forward something and you don't know the implication. And you think maybe if it's a lie. For example, the BBC clip they were talking about, they mentioned specifically the story of the tigers in Russia. So for most of us, since we know, of course, Russia is a full country, but even then, the ridiculousness of having zoo animals roam on the streets. For most of us, of course, we read that with a grain of salt, and we then you then go online to try and verify, and you see it's fake, so you don't share it. But others shared it, whether saying it was humorous or not, but without any disclaimers, they just share it as fact, and most people believed it. So and that's the same thing that's going on with all the messages telling people to have miracle cures, gargle warm water, take bicarbonate soda. These are things I've also been telling people in groups, please forward things that you know or verify to be true. If you just go online for those two things that I mentioned, There's several articles. The Reuters article, for example, was talking about that particular forward that was telling people to drink bicarbonate soda and I think lemon juice, and saying that that was false or that was fake. So I think definitely fake news is a very, very big issue. It's wrong for the users and listeners to forward and share fake news and information. It is criminal.
We are going to come back to that one, because that one, I don't see it ending very soon. My view on it is that it's a double-edged sword. On one point, you want people to enjoy their freedom of expression, their freedom of speech, and however, you also want to protect other individuals from fake news, because it has implications on the stress, psychology, and it might incite people into acting in a certain manner that they probably wouldn't have acted upon. So there's a battle of the minds going on between governments trying to impose their will on this freedom of curtail freedom of speech and expression. But then on the other hand, you have them exercising their obligation to protect the general populace against all these fake news. So that battle, I don't think we're going to get resolved very soon. But I'm mindful of the time, and I wanted to get into the next phase, because one of the things we've looked at maybe for those who joined us late, we've looked at what some real entrepreneurs and business people on the ground are doing in terms of deploying this technology to try and help with COVID. Kenneth has been talking about some of the moral dilemmas, so to speak, between deployment of technology and the battle with civil liberties. I'll come back to you, Kenneth, on the issue of intellectual property, particularly with regards to the speed with which technology now needs to be deployed during this pandemic, and whether the challenge for some of the guys like Davis or Ruth, whether they have to wait to go through these arduous IP verification processes. But let me get to talk to James before we do that. James Beronda, I hope you're there. James is, I've known James for a while. We went to school together way back in Barra High School. He's always been in the tech space. I know that he's very keen on digital transformation, smart cities. Every time I come to Uganda talking about all these interesting things, he's the one who is always like, yeah, we're talking the same language. So he's currently heading the research function at UCC. And previously, I think he was a technical manager for this same organization. So James, good to see you. I can't see you though. I think your video is off.
Nice to see you. I said that I've switched off my video because the network isn't quite good here where I am.
Now,
it's quite unfortunate.
That is question number one. That is question number one, because
it's probably also that it was never envisaged that so many people would be working from home at the same time. And probably the telecom resources are not being upgraded in the same way we would have wished. But it gives us so many lessons. But glad to be here.
Now, in fact, that was going to be my very first question. So for me, as an academic researcher, whatever, I've been used to working from home. So most of my work is on my laptop, doing my research and things. So, but not everyone has been working from home. Most of the people in the West, it's quite a significant number of people have experienced somehow working from home. We have super fast broadband, so the infrastructure somehow exists. But in Uganda, this must be a rude awakening for very many individuals, for very many businesses, including governments, particularly those that are dealing with sensitive data, and now people have to work from remote locations. So I know that you guys have been working on rolling out some of these technologies, but as you've demonstrated, you obviously have bandwidth challenges and technical challenges. What are the aspirations of UCC from a technical point of view in terms of making sure that this digital transformation actually happens versus what the challenges are? Because with digital transformation, I work with lots of startups around fintech, even including some in Uganda, and technology in terms of the speed with which people can actually use the technology, the cost of that technology. Some people can't work from home because there's no broadband. They're using, 3G or 4G. I think you're now on 4G. And I have a question for you on 5G, but somewhere further down the line. What are your thoughts on the what are you guys trying to do to speed up the technological revolution, and what challenges are you finding?
Thank you, Dennis. I'm one of the people who believe the digital transformation subject has never come at the right time like now. Because we've spent so much money in all our IT systems, infrastructure and all that. But every time you try to talk about digital transformation, people actually doze off because they do not exactly understand what you're talking about, or you're trying to be techie or something. But I think it gives us a lesson, all of us, that we need to sit down, take a step back, and reflect on our organizations and the sort of expenditure we put into these sort of assets. For example, I'm working from home now. We all working from home probably now about over a month, because some of us broke off a bit earlier. But there are challenges because everyone right now is at home. So meaning that there are bandwidth constraints than anticipated, because we never imagined everybody would be at home at the same time.
That's true.
But it also tells you what is the resilience of our sort of networks. How are they able to, say, adapt to the new demands? But nevertheless, I think the Commission's role is to provide sort of an enabling environment. First of all, we are a technological neutral regulator. We do not dictate technology. But however, what we're supposed to do is provide an enabling environment for whatever technology that comes. That's when you're actually getting your license. We don't care whatever license, whatever technology you're bringing, but do we have the environment in which you can actually operate? For example, now I wanted to comment probably before I dive into the whole digital transformation thing.
Yeah,
I listened earlier, Kenneth talk about the applications they're using and all that. And like you rightly said earlier on, before my current position, I was in RSCDF, which is another division of the Commission. That's the Rural Communication Development Fund. And there we've been championing so many things, and which some of our affordability, network access, digital literacy, and etc. And the whole idea has been that regardless of whatever innovation, I'm speaking in a Ugandan context right now, regardless of whatever innovation you bring about, if you're unable to put it out to the masses where digital literacy is so low, they're still useless. For example, that application Kenneth is talking about, and what was the other name? Ruth?
I think it was Davis and
Davis. Yeah, sorry, Kenneth. Yeah, it was Davis.
And Ruth. Yeah.
And Ruth. Yeah. For example, of the 25 million subscribers we're talking about currently we have in the country, just over 20% have smartphones. You get me? So who are you actually targeting? You're actually targeting me, Dennis, Kenneth, who probably already have a lot more information. The actual people you should be targeting are the people in the villages, the masses, and everything. But the question is, do they have the right access? Are they do they have the digital literacy competences required? And also from an innovation perspective, I've always argued out that innovation should be looked from a 360 angle. For example, Dennis, I know probably you the entrepreneur coaches and etc. I know you're more concerned with, are you going to make money out of this innovation? Are you going to, but my question is, who are you targeting? Who is this solution actually targeting? If it's for the people out there in China Mukanka, have you given them a preposition of why they should own a smartphone and why they should actually use your app? Do they even have the smartphone in the first place? Or is your app in the language they actually understand? To me, these are very, very basic things, but which are rather very important. And that's where we see UCC again under the RSCD has been putting a lot of focus on digital literacy, because you need to educate the public. They need to understand what are you talking about, and you need to break it down in their local languages. Now, by us doing that, and also ensuring that we find ways of increasing the smartphone penetration, for instance, I was very glad when we saw, I think, a factory in Namave, which was trying to make smartphones. If the smartphones can be done here in Uganda, bring the cost quite low. And the other issue about cost of the smartphones, some of the things have never been cheap. And I keep saying this. The smartphones we're talking about, 150,000, 60,000. The question is, do they actually meet the actual standard? I'll probably answer that in your other question about radiation and all that, but probably not now. But to me, those are some of the basics we need to really look at: affordability, network access, digital literacy. In terms of network access, for instance, we have a new broadband policy of 2019, and I think the commission or the ministry is becoming a bit tougher on the service providers. For example, now they are required to have over a 90% network coverage. Now, whereas I understand where the government is coming from, but also you need to understand our demographics. For instance, you must understand that most of the people who are going to use smartphones and whatever are in the urban areas in terms of who can actually afford. They are in the urban areas. We're not saying you shouldn't provide service to some of the remote places in the country, but the question is, can they actually afford? So to a provider like MTN, when he's looking at his network, all he's looking at is what we call the ARPU, the average revenue per user. If he's looking at a mast in, which is the remotest place I can talk about, maybe in Karamoja, and he looks at the app on that site, and it is, say, $10 a month, and he has another site in an urban, semi-urban place which is bringing him, say, $100. Naturally, he's going to put all his efforts onto where he's making more money. And again, the commission under RSCD has been doing this over years, and that's how we managed to get a high percentage of 2G coverage. At least for Uganda, you find voice, though we still have gaps, you find majorly about 90% voice coverage across the country. And when I talk about this, there's a difference having a voice coverage and there's also quality of service. Those are two different things you need to appreciate. You can have a service, but then the quality could actually be low. But those are things we actually look at. Now, the RSCDF also comes into play in this kind of environment. What do? We know the telco will not be able to make money in specific regions of the country, whether you like it or not. Much as you're forcing them to go into these sort of areas, they will not be able to. And the fund is now supposed to come in and subsidize and say, okay, MTN, you are in this area. How much money would you want to have to ensure that you break even on this specific site? And then RSCDF will come in and say, okay, we see you have your negative NPV. In order to bring it into a positive, this is how much you require, and this is how much we are giving you. So we'll give you $100,000 US, put up a site. We know you will not be making money, but please. That is one way. The other, still in the same broadband policy, is they introduced national roaming. We're yet to see how this will be implemented, but basically what it means is that if you are in a location where MTN isn't and there is Airtel, MTN can actually roam. I know roaming has been about international traffic and etc. Dennis, you coming from England, roaming on your Vodafone or O2. And then now we're talking about internal roaming. So you are an MTN customer roaming on UT on Airtel or Airtel and vice versa. So those are some of the
questions that you're answering one by one. And that was one of them where different organizations, different telecommunications companies could use the same infrastructure. So for instance, if there's a mast in Kabale or in Arua, does Airtel also have to have the same mast? Could they use the same mast? Is that what's happening? Is that what you mean by sharing roaming? Or are you actually saying that with the same mast, Airtel doesn't have to participate on that infrastructure, but just the technology is linked in such a way that you roam, literally roam onto the other network as opposed to using the same infrastructure? So
exactly. You're right. You're spot on, Dennis. That it's infrastructure sharing.
Okay.
I should call it, and doesn't stop on only the telephone BTSs, etc., but also in terms of infrastructure like fiber. Which brings me to another issue, the fiber, for instance. Now we know NITA, the National IT Authority, has probably covered the whole country, with the exception of phase 3, which is now going to tackle the northeastern part of Uganda. So you find, and I think phase 3 is now also saying that they should go up to sub-county level. Now, you're only targeting administrative bits of government, but this is big infrastructure, honestly, I'm talking about. And these are my personal opinion is that the infrastructure is too huge for you to just enable a sub-county chief to talk to an RDC or to a person in Kampala. The same infrastructure could actually be used for other things. But then it takes me to another question. You're taking infrastructure to the sub-counties, you're taking infrastructure to district levels. NITA did actually install collaborative software and equipment in almost all the ministries. But the question is, how many ministries are actually using this infrastructure? So we come in a situation like this and we're all panicking, oh, how do I switch on this? How do I do that? There are probably things we need to have done yesterday. So not because some of the things we haven't done, but probably there needs to be a sort of a culture shift and thinking.
Which brings me to the next question. James, you're way ahead of my thought process.
Dennis, wait, I just wanted to clarify on what James had mentioned on the issue of the interconnectivity, which is, it's now mandatory. UCC made it mandatory for all telco providers or ISP providers to be able to interconnect with each other. So the specific answer to the question you asked as to whether another telecom provider can utilize another entity's mast, the answer is yes. By law, they can, and they are mandated by law to be able to allow each other to interconnect with their services to be able to achieve the goal that James mentioned of ensuring that Uganda is fully covered in every area. That's all.
That's a very good clarification. And when you study digital platforms, interconnectivity is one of those key aspects, making sure that as many people as possible are able to use the same resources, because then it becomes cheaper for everyone involved, and then there's more value for the users. But it brings me back to the next question that I wanted to ask you, James, which was about Uganda's demographics. Uganda has a huge advantage in terms of our demographics. Very many young people who are tech savvy. I do take the point that the cost of these digital gadgets is still maybe unaffordable for some of the individuals that are not able to afford, but also that the cost is coming down. The cost of the handsets gradually has come down. I remember the cost of a smartphone, it has come down. Also, the cost of internet has come down. The cost of GSM technology is coming down. So if you get all those two things together, if you look at our young people who are tech savvy, who are growing up into an environment where technology is cheaper, I think there's still a case to be made for the rolling up of all this technology in preparation for this wave of young people who are going to be occupying these offices where, for instance, as you highlighted, where the technology has been there for maybe some of the government departments, but they haven't been using it as they could have, because the tradition has been that you get out of home, you will drive to work and work from there, and that's it until they are shocked. So you make a valid point in terms of the demographics. What are you doing to change the culture so that as many people as possible are brought onto these digital platforms?
Honestly, Dennis, you're asking me a very difficult question because I remember the time I left UK and came back here. There was a very big culture shock for me, but interestingly, 9 years later, probably I'm also into the same sort of. So to change culture is something very, 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 very hard to do. But then I think all we have to do is to continue championing some of the things. And for instance, I've been a champion at my workplace, where I've been telling them that, guys, we need to start thinking about working from home. Even before the whole COVID issue had come into place, I was already trying to champion it, because I was trying to tell them, look, I know most corporate organizations right now are implementing balanced scorecards, and I'm saying, if you're implementing balanced scorecards and you have technology in place, then why can't we go a step further and say, for example, if I'm into research, you are into which other sort of research, internal audit, and etc. Why should you wake up every other day at 5? I mean, then it's so crazy. Me getting from where I live right now in Bulindo, I have to wake up at 5 to be at work by 8. The amount of time I lose in traffic is so massive that probably I could have done quite a lot. But do I really have to be at office? Probably I could be working from home. So to me, it is through advocacy, through organizations, and again, our traditional. Because every time I bring up this topic, then people say, our standing orders from public service. And I'm thinking those should be the same people to change the sort of thinking. We should move away from this, I call it colonial thinking of report at 8, break off at 5, come back on Monday.
Yeah.
We need to change a whole shift. They need to start measuring productivity in whatever forms with a combination of tools, balanced scorecards, where you have your particular targets and combine it with technology. I mean, that's the only way to really do it. But in terms of changing cultures for people, but hopefully now that they've seen the difficulty of working from home, in terms of some of them it's about the small competences. I don't even want to call them competences, but the soft skills, you understand?
Yes.
You could probably
now,
take all.
Don't get me started on this whole topic of digitizing, particularly government, because I think anyone that has interfaced with governments world over, but most especially in Uganda, if you go to our sub-counties and that level, then you will know the challenge we're dealing with. However, I must say that I have been lately, because I've been following what's been happening in Uganda, I know that the hearts are in the right place. I've seen some initiatives around revenue collection, around national IDs, and so on and so forth. Yeah. So I'm confident that things are beginning to happen in that direction. But before I give you one last question, which was about these claims of 5G being a big problem. Maybe this is not too relevant an issue for Uganda, because I'm not sure whether you are there on the 5G. But let me just check on my Facebook page to see if there are any comments that I could take, and then we up there. We had a small issue with the technology. Yes.
Sorry, I was just going to say, as you do that, I just wanted to just mention something small about just to add on to what James had said about culture. Perhaps I'll wear my hat now by a government, because I advise the Ministry of ICT externally, and we work a lot with UCT and MITA, especially on the Digitize Uganda initiative. But my view on transforming culture, especially to get people to understand, go away, change that mindset that James was talking about. It's a gradual process, but I think you can already see it happening. One of the first instances of steps when we saw that was with the mobile money. I remember the time that mobile money was introduced. I can't remember seeing any government entity actively pushing it. Was perhaps individuals, but now mobile money has become, I don't even want to call it a necessity. It's become a way of life, and especially now that the government is advocating or asking people not to use paper money, mobile money has now become crucial and critical. Yes, and it doesn't matter where you're from, as you were saying, whether you're in Kampala, whether you're in Kashari, whether you're wherever, you find that more people are using mobile money. And the reason why that is goes back to what we mentioned before, Dennis, in regards to having the collective, understanding it. The whole reason why we're able to take dollars or pounds or Uganda shilling is not because these have been forced on us, it's because you know that if you get a shilling or a pound or a dollar, you can go to a shop and whoever is going to sell you something will receive it and give you a product in exchange for the dollar, shilling, or pound that you have given to them. So it's that acceptance that we need to get. And I think we're on the right track currently with one, of course, with having the enabling legal framework, but also in terms of the policies. One that I think that role is not or should not be left to government, but to people like James, who are saying that, look, I'm seeing the need and I'm seeing for the people under me. Not all of them need to come to work. So if your institution, if you have such discussions at that particular level, then you have a trickle-down effect, and then eventually you have a lot more people embracing technologies that were once, seen as non-essential, but now become essential. I just want to clarify that.
Kenneth, I hear you. However, my experience in terms of from a consulting point of view, culture change can happen in often two ways. If it is the political change, often it might come from a bottom up where everyone rises, But most corporate change is usually top down, where through steadfast leadership, the guys at the top dictate what happens, and at government level, that might happen through policy. I know that we've had this discussion, maybe not between me and you, but do you think, for instance, that mobile money tax or social media tax or those kinds of policies that are putting up walls, at least seemingly from the Wananchi's point of view, if you're talking about uptake of digital technologies, are those policies helpful? Perhaps not. What are your thoughts on that? I know we need to collect some money somewhere, but do you see those as challenges?
No, yes, I do see it as a challenge, but Dennis, to be honest and realistically speaking, even now, again, I will still keep drawing from the positives that this whole pandemic has had, in the sense that people are now seeing that leadership is hard. There was a time when all you'd see on social media and on Facebook is, this is what the government should do, this is what they should have done. But then, when you ask yourself that question, if you are the leader, what decisions would you have taken? And that goes backwards to what you were mentioning before, weighing the need to regarding privacy and data. What's the, how do we? But then the good thing is we now have speaking from a legal perspective, there's several cases that talk about, if you're looking at defamation, for example, the need for responsible communication, where you weigh the need and you see, okay, as bloggers, as readers, etc., if I am communicating, you have to weigh the need. So, the need to give information, but also the need to give the information responsibly. So now answering this particular question as well, incentives like tax, the government has to collect money somehow. If you have an economy that has been primarily dependent on aid and is now trying to be self-sufficient, how do you expect them to make or to get the money? Perhaps the questions we should be having are, what are the use, or what is the government using for that money? And I can assure you, if perhaps some of these issues that we have and some of these issues that we talk about, if they were not there, I don't think we would have as much discussion about this tax, or about mobile money and social media tax as we have. If we knew that maybe if I paid my tax this way, this money was going to be direct, is going to fix the road right outside my home, or is going to do A, B, and C, I think the discussion would be different. But I agree with you. Yes, my view is that there has to be a balance. I still believe that government still has to collect taxes. Yet I also still believe that the internet is, in my view, a human right now, in the sense that if you don't have internet, you will be disenfranchised. You won't be able to access certain or most essentials. Even now, during the lockdown, if you don't have internet, you are disadvantaged, because if you have internet, it's very easy for you to go on Jumia yourself board and order something online. And if you don't, you're most likely going to be the one who's going to walk. So I think it's just, I don't have a clear answer, unfortunately, but I'm saying that with everything, you have to have a balance in the sense that if you're levying a tax, it has to be a tax that people can be able to afford to pay. And then maybe the tax is also on, because even the internet should be categorized into essential and non-essential. And I believe that there are certain things that are honestly non-essential in the sense that even the taxation, if you look at internet, the internet is not being taxed, it's social media that is being taxed. Now that is a whole other discussion as to whether people utilize social media for the right purposes. But if you talk about mobile money in particular,
I think,
but I hear you. Let me. I'm mindful of the time.
I think Davis, just a small one. Dennis, you probably want to open up a whole other debate about net neutrality, and the case in point would be the US, because my argument has always been that charging social media and WhatsApp and etc. It is one form of, you're really touching this sensitive thing, but this has been done in the US quite a lot. So do you want me to answer the 5G question?
No, before you do that, I just wanted to, come back very quickly to Kenneth's thoughts on social media tax. And because from a digital platform strategy point of view, we're here talking about uptake of technology in Gulu, in all these other places. The best digital platform strategies are ones where it's like setting a honey trap. And as more people come, as more bees come to that honey trap, then you can collect more honey. Okay, so I think I do take on board the fact that government obviously needs to collect tax, but I think the argument within some circles was that perhaps the tax either was premature given the infancy of the infrastructure and uptake of digital technologies,
and it's a direct tax.
And yes, and it's a direct tax, but also the citizenry's appreciation of the purpose for which the tax was levied, especially like on social media. Or the use to which that tax is being put, that I think were some of the key challenges with. But I do appreciate we're running out of time. That's going to be a huge.
Yeah, no. Actually, no. I can actually just answer that very, very quickly and very, very briefly by borrowing from another field, which is the drone sector. So in the drone sector, one of the biggest issues has been the safety of drones. And the reason why that is because whenever you see a movie or clip, whenever you see drone, or what you think about is military, drone strikes, striking missiles, but your drones are being deployed even by IDI. I read in the papers where they were citing Dr. Martin Balavan, they were saying that they're going to pilot blood delivery for drones. But now we had a conference with the World Bank held a conference in Kigali in February, and we're discussing drone usage. And I consult the World Bank and advise on drones, particularly in this region. And I wrote a whole paper on drone regulation. And in the paper, I was pushing for what we call evidence-based regulation, or an evidence-based approach to regulation, in the sense that instead of regulating and stopping things or enforcing things, you take it on a case-by-case basis. In a sense that if you're looking at drones in particular, if you license a drone operator to deliver goods or blood, and then let's say they crash into an area, if it would be very unfortunate to stop that particular person from operating henceforth. But what the countries that we're modeling, like Switzerland, are doing is saying, okay, if you have a company like Matanet in Switzerland, which was allowed to deliver to pilot deliveries of essential commodities, and instead of stopping them from flying, let's see what is the reason why the drone crashed in the first place. Could it have been that perhaps the regulations were put in regards to line of sight were out of context? And so it's that approach that perhaps we should also use whenever we're talking about social media tax and the rest. Because you see, one thing that you cannot deny, it's the same thing as saying, why should you tax essential goods? Why should you tax clothes? Why do you have tax on your shirt? I would think that having clothes is a very, very important. I don't know whether to call it a commodity, but yes, it's a very important thing in our community. So it's the same thing also with the social media or with the internet or with the mobile money. Approach I think we should be taking is evidence-based instead of critiquing, instead of criticizing and saying, no, we shouldn't have this tax. The issue is, okay, so if we do have this tax, let us look at it in two ways. If we do have this tax, how can we make sure that it doesn't apply to every single social media platform, for example? Are there platforms that we consider essential that perhaps we can be able to exclude from this and maybe only tax A, B, and C? Those are discussions that I think we should be having. Or number two, if we do not tax, then okay, then where else can we be able to look? But in all honesty, even when the tax was introduced, it was very controversial. But if you've seen what has been happening, in the sense that where the public has come up and said, no, this is too high, okay, they go back and say, okay, let us reduce this and see. I think that approach of listening to the public, listening to people like Dennis and myself was saying, no, look, this tax is too high, the Wananchi won't be able to afford it. That is the kind of balance that we need, where we look at things from an objective perspective, from an evidence-based perspective, rather than looking at it broadly.
Talking of evidence-based perspective, and I know we're going on about this social media tax, and in light of the fact that now evidence is overwhelming, that everyone is trying to work from home, that people are not touching money, they are using mobile money tax, and as COVID is busy bashing economies around the world, do you think there is a case to be made to suspend at least for, let's say, 3 months or 4, social media tax and mobile money tax, so that we can help with the uptake of these technologies?
I would say for mobile money, yes. I would say there's a need to be able to perhaps move the tax away from the final consumer and stop it from becoming a direct tax, like James mentioned, to making it an indirect tax. Same thing with the social media, because in all honesty, even the people that cry about net neutrality, about social media and the rest, most of them will use social media to disseminate fake news. Most of them will use social media for fun. Very few will use it for business. But so we have to have that distinction, perhaps, and have a clear, the same way you have tax exemptions. There are various amendments are making to our tax laws, and in particular, the exemptions that are going to apply to software for manufacturing companies. Now, that is what I call evidence-based, where you're seeing that you need to spur manufacturing, but one of the biggest expenses is the software that they use. In order to protect the company from cyber attacks, you need to be able to get this particular software. But for you to use it, you're paying this amount in tax. Now, your said you don't need to pay the tax if you're utilizing software for manufacturing. So that is what we need to do.
I hear you, but one of the challenges with the gatekeepers, who decides? So in the West, lots of things happen virally. I mean, Zoom, just a few months ago, was just Zoom. Now everyone, even us right now, we are using Zoom. Who decides? And there's lots of people who are right now, we're streaming this on Facebook Live as well. So another person might not appreciate the significance of, let's say, Facebook or Twitter or LinkedIn, or might actually be against it, partly because they've been on the receiving end of wrong information, fake news, and so they have a different view in which. But if you look at other people, businesses that are taking advantage of social media, creatives that are collaborating and designing content that they're sharing on social media, their views about which industries are important are going to be different from the views of the guys within the fintech space, from those in the medical space, from the manufacturers. And I think once you start cherry picking, then you open up a whole new can of worms with regards to who decides.
Yes, then it's exactly that. Because you see, you can't get views from everyone. It is not feasible. And that's why you have elected leaders. Those leaders are supposed to be taking your views. And especially even with bills and laws before they come out. I'm aware that in our lawmaking process, they allow consultations with the public. I have been consulted on several bills. For example, we're in Parliament a month ago or so talking about the National Payment Systems Bill, which is supposed to regulate all fintech and all payment platforms. And we got views, we shared those views with Parliament. Some views they took, some views they didn't. But the reason why we have leaders, why we have structures in place is to be able to, now, so the question is who, the people who determine should be our leaders, and how they determine should be using evidence. But one of the ways is using data. Davis and Ruth mentioned how they're using data to be able to make, to allow for health workers to be able to trace and track these cases. So I believe that our policymakers, the leaders that you vote, that I vote, are the ones that should be the ones that should be having these discussions on our behalf, but should also listen to us and say, okay, look, if this is your view, this is the view for. And I know this is how democracy. This is how a democracy should work. It's how a democracy will work. That is my honest view. I think the only problem is perhaps the people that give those particular policies sometimes may not be alive to some of the issues or problems that are faced. That's why I'm saying it's very, when I say evidence-based, it's not just saying it's using evidence that actually either shows this is the trend or this is not. And the best way to do that is by leveraging data.
As a researcher, that's music to my ears, and most of the discussions or criticisms are usually forward or suggestions and ideas. Often I am looking at data from different places. So that's but now I'm mindful that our time is about to run out. And James, I want to bring you in on the 5G issue, but let me just check some of the questions that we have on social media. Because I didn't stream this live from my Facebook page, I piggybacked a watch party from my colleague, Eugene. So maybe some of my typical people who would be watching are not watching, but there are some interesting comments. UCC, Uganda College of Commerce, that's Julius Mchunguzi. No, it's not Uganda College of Commerce, it's Uganda Communication Commission. Ernest Tabaho, Professor Ernest Tabaho is saying fake news is a behavioral issue that needs beyond just legal enforcement. I agree. A number of people are watching from different places. So James, talking of fake news, there's been a lot of fake news around 5G, and that the reason we have COVID-19 is because 5G somehow affects COVID-19. What are your thoughts on that?
Well, Dennis, the whole issue is about, and I mean, these have not just started right now. There have been conspiracies which have been going on for quite some time now. Interestingly, my division also handles environmental issues, so I normally get loads and loads of them, complaints on radio stations within human access points. And the whole issue is people come up and say, this whole BTS within my neighborhood is causing me to get sick. It is so many things. Developing cancer, we've had ABCD. I mean, they're endless. And some of them end up to really being about money. And they say, okay, if you give me money, I'm willing to live with it. So you can understand that sort of argument. However, let me just say one thing. And sometimes I really want to sum it up. Something about radiation, not only from 5G, but all other mobile radios. Dennis, if we were to, in my opinion, maybe to start with, we should be worried about texting while driving or talking on phone while driving, because that is most likely to kill you than actual radiation. One, we all know COVID is a virus, no doubt. Even all the scientists have told you that. And we know 5G is about electromagnetic fields and radiation. So it's a wave, completely two different things. Where's the correlation? They are thinking probably this radiation could affect your molecular structure. Now, let me tell you one thing, Dennis. Radio communications, then we talk. Let me tell you actually things we should be worried about. But did you know that you're actually exposed to radiation all over? From your PC, which you're looking at now.
Like my bulb.
From your bulb, from your microwave, to visible sunlight. You know the visible light? Now, when you look at the electromagnetic spectrum, radio, which includes the 5G, 4G, and whichever technologies, are way, way below. They're way below the visible light. And of course, gamma rays and X-rays are a bit higher. You should actually be even more worried about the X-rays, which we actually take for medical. But the whole issue is what level of exposure. It's all about exposure. Because if I left you in day sunlight for, say, 5 years, you'd probably be dead.
Be black.
Or be black. So the conspiracies are, I mean, there are so many, and the joke I was having is probably having too much sunlight probably explains the slow development in Africa. Would you believe that? I could make so many arguments and probably you would believe me. I mean, these conspiracies are not going to go away, but I find it quite saddening why you're starting to attack infrastructure, which same infrastructure we need in these sort of circumstances. You get it? It's because, and I know not just only at Uganda Communications Commission right now, but world all over. Because last year I was at Ofcom. These are the most issues they have to deal with. 5G radiation and actually it's called electromagnetic field exposure. Yeah. People feel they are not safe, they whatever, fake news and...
So basically what you're saying is that we are worrying for no apparent reason.
Exactly. The levels of exposure you have are so minute and the power levels are so minute that you shouldn't even be worried about it. Even when you look at
I was just trying to support James by saying that even bananas have or emit low-level radiation because bananas contain because bananas contain potassium, and potassium if it decays, it emits a low-level. Of course, it's not. They're just slightly radioactive. But the other things you're talking about are things we use every day. So the problem is people fear what they don't understand, and if they don't understand 5G, then that's why you have issues saying that causes COVID.
Okay, guys, this has been a very interesting discussion. But let me try and bring it back to where we all started. We started by looking at obviously what's happening with COVID. We spoke to real startups, entrepreneurs with real products that are trying to solve this. And then we got into the legislative side of things. And once you get James talking about all these technical things, we won't stop. We'll end up in Mars or somewhere around technologies. One of our guests who was supposed to join us is Dwain Reid. He's right now online. Dwain, how are you doing? Hello, Dwain. Dwain, you're muted, so perhaps you can unmute yourself. Dwain is a very interesting guy. We've worked together at Kingston University in London. Dwain does a lot of work with entrepreneurs. Dwain Reid is a speaker. He's a coach, business coach. He's a very motivational guy. He's been to Uganda a number of times, actually. A couple of times on the LEAP conference. Dwain, are you there? I can see Dwain, but he's muted. Let me try and unmute him. Bear with me 1 second. Dwain, can you hear me? Oh, apparently he's locked out and waiting for re-entry. These are the, perhaps my colleague can let him in. While Dwain is joining us, bear with me 1 second. Hello,
Dennis.
Yes.
Probably as he's coming in also, allow me to share with you some of the things we're doing right now before COVID actually came into place, and what we're trying to do at the Commission in this whole digital transformation thing. We're trying to do test beds, and test beds are actually done all over the world, especially for those technologies which might not be in your current licensing frameworks. And where we're trying to do something called sandbox licensing. So it's a new technology, you're not so sure why it's running, you don't know how to operate, put it in a confined place and see how it behaves before you start licensing. So we start, as a commission under my division, we're trying to do some test beds, and this would include all the frontier technologies, IoTs, artificial intelligence, and big data analysis. And here we want to work with academia and the private sector. And talk about the private sector, these are the telecoms, the vendor companies like Huawei, where we can give now opportunity to innovators and say, okay, this is about 5G, this is about smart parking or smart whatever, please have this environment, test whatever you want to do before you actually put it out for commercial use. And it has been widely done across the world, and we want to take the same direction. I thought I would probably mention that.
Thank you. Thank you for that. But James, maybe another discussion that you and I need to have is how we deploy or encourage our young people to start creatively and innovatively taking advantage of the technological infrastructure, coming up with thoughts, ideas, innovations, and all these creative things. Maybe we can talk about some of the work that we're doing as the Association of Student Enterprises in Uganda, around the things we do with the LEAP conference, with a number of business incubators, but that's a discussion for another day. So I now know that we have Dwain. Dwain Reid is back. Dwain, can you hear me?
I could always hear you. The issue was whether you could hear me or not. So can you hear me now?
Oh, fantastic, fantastic. Good to see you. Good to hear you. I don't think I can see you actually. Maybe if you're muted.
I'm an avatar.
You're an avatar. Okay, we'll let you avatar. We'll let you avatar. So I was explaining to everyone else that Dwain is the guy who introduced me into the world of enterprise and entrepreneurship while I was a student at Kingston University in London. As the president of Entrepreneur Society, he essentially gave me all the guidance when I was setting up the business incubator there. He was there on hand to see the whole thing working out. So he gave me a lot of support in terms of when we set up the Association of Student Enterprises in Uganda. He came for our launch, the first LEAP conference, and I know that he's been to Uganda twice since then. So he is as good a Ugandan as he is British. So good to see you, Dwain.
Thank you for joining.
Now, Dwain, I know that you work with lots of startups, particularly young people. What are you seeing in terms of? I wanted to give our viewers and listeners a flavor of how technology is being deployed within the startup community here in London, particularly with regards to how they are responding to COVID-19. Lots of businesses are locked down. People are working from home. What are you seeing happening? How are startups responding? How are individual entrepreneurs responding? How are your students at Kingston University that are entrepreneurial? What's happening in your space?
Yeah, so that's a very broad question, but I guess it's a case by case basis, really. But if we're generalizing, I think that the first week or couple of weeks of the scenario. So if we say we're in about week 4 or 5 of this, let's say this being real, if you want to call it that, in the UK at least. Sorry. So I think at first it was fair, as with everybody, and uncertainty, and I guess just a moment of pause and worry that if you've got a startup that you're not going to be able to trade through this period. I think the government introducing the initiatives that they have kind of helped quite a lot of people out. So whether it be access to grants, whether it be access to loans, whether it be the furlough scheme. So I'm not sure how aware of, I don't know where everybody is because I've joined late, but in the UK, the government have introduced an initiative that will essentially pay for 80% of the salary the wage of your staff, not salary, sorry, your staff costs, which is helpful to, a lot of businesses. Not every business will be able to qualify for it, but those that do will basically get them through. So I think we're now at the stage where the businesses that are going to survive or can continue are really just having to embrace digital technology to kind of get on with what they're doing. And it's kind of surprised me how many businesses weren't already using digital technology. So when we're talking about things like Zoom meetings or Skype meetings, the amount of let's say entrepreneurs. So I work at the Kingston University, or I work with the Kingston University entrepreneurs. So anyone that's interested in starting or growing a business and they're a student at Kingston, I should be their first point of call. Now, I've arranged so many meetings with these would-be entrepreneurs or people that have been running businesses for a couple of years, and it's been their first time they've used Skype. And I'm like, huh? Like, what do you mean? I thought you guys were the digital innovators, like where have you been for the last few years kind of thing. So I think it's just about being able to, they've been embracing technology. Now, financially, I guess, we can't have the answers. Like, I don't think any business, well, most businesses can't afford not to trade. If we're being realistic, we're probably talking about people realistically not being able to trade from, you know, end of March right up until, if we're being realistic, probably August times. Okay, and that's being ambitious. So, you know, I don't know how many of our businesses are set up that they can actually last that time without any revenue whatsoever. So, you know what I mean? It's an interesting time, kind of thing. Very, very, very interesting. But, you know, to answer your question more simply, I think people have just been embracing digital technology, understanding that, I guess, you know, for a lot of our businesses, they were pre-startups. Okay, so, you know, they're not actually trading yet. So I think what this will teach them is that actually, when they are starting up, or when they start up for real, you always need to have rainy day money. You know, and that's probably the biggest positive from this scenario. For those that weren't quite trading yet, it will teach them that actually, you know what, say something like this does happen. Because even me, you know, I've been running the business for 17 years now. Like, and if I'm honest, I never had COVID-19 rainy day money, or I never thought I did. But now it's like, actually, you know what, I need to actually make sure if something like this was to happen, we're actually really ready. I don't know if that makes sense.
Yeah. And today's session is all around technology. And I know that we always talk us in the West being ahead of the game in terms of technology. I'm not so sure that that is the case, because the last time I was in Beijing around 2009, I was blown away by how the internet was way faster and technology and so on. But for Africa, the discussion we're having was around uptake of the internet not being as high, or maybe some challenges with regards to costs and so on. For young entrepreneurs in Africa, for instance, or even here in the UK, what kind of thoughts would you give them in terms of taking advantage of technology? What kind of tools are you using, for instance, that you have found very helpful that they could be using? Whether they are creatives, whether they are in the fintech space. Any thoughts on that, on the use of technology for startups and how they're using it here in the UK?
Well, it's funny you say that. So, you know, you can't, how can I put this fairly without offending anyone? So obviously the West and Africa, generally speaking, you know, there's a difference or what have you, but people forget that even in the UK, there are many students or many young people, or many people, it doesn't have to be young, they don't have to be students, that can't afford to have the internet at the speed which is just generally accepted in this country. So even just answering that question, when I'm talking to some of my startups, I've got to tell them that actually, even things like Zoom. So right now, I've decided, not because I can't use the video, but I'm not using video on this call. So Zoom and Skype both have options where you can not use the video from other people, so therefore reduce your bandwidth of calls. So even tips like that. So even tips like that are quite useful for young entrepreneurs or people in countries where technology isn't quite up to speed yet, sort of thing. And you take those kind of things for granted, because I was literally in a session the other day, and one of my colleagues, so, you know, she's an adult as well, she was like, her bandwidth is struggling in this meeting, and she's somebody that I would assumed would have had fine internet. Do you see what I'm trying to say? So those are the things we've got to consider. So yes, we can tell our young startups to, you know, go and use technology, but, you know, can they, and how can they reduce bandwidth and so forth? But I think, you know, technology aside, you know, the advice that we've been giving to our startups is that you've got to take this period as, I would say, almost like a 12-week relaunch, because you need to make sure you're in a position that when things go back to normal, if you've got customers already, they come back to you, because we're going to be hit with like something that's very similar to a recession.
Yeah.
So customers are only going to use, or, you know, consumers are only going to use things that they see as essential, or where they've had extremely good customer service.
Yeah.
We're all going to be making decisions as, you know, when things go back to normal, what can we cut? Even me as a worker, I'm thinking to myself, do I need to go back to going into the office 4 days a week? And that changes my working pattern and also changes my expenditure, because then all of a sudden I'm not spending money in the canteen like I used to.
Yeah.
So even businesses like our canteen in the university, they have to think, well, actually, how can we keep people coming back and or spending more? You see what I'm trying to say? So I think this is a 12-week or 12-ish week relaunch for any business, small, medium, or large kind of thing.
Yeah.
Me personally, I think that's what you should be using. And our businesses, so my property business and my childcare business, that's exactly what we're doing. So we're going back into our digital marketing strategy and making sure it's ready for a relaunch. We're looking at our customers and making sure we do some customer feedback exercises with them, asking them, you know, what we could have done better in the last few years, and make sure we improve the things that we can improve on.
Good. Now, that is exactly what I was talking about in my week one, saying that this is a creative restructuring. It's an opportunity for regrowth, rebirth, redo things differently. And I agree with you as well that even though the lockdown has been, I think, put for 3 weeks, I reckon you're realistically looking at wherever this lockdown happens, you're realistically looking at around 2 to 3 months. 2 months for things to normalize, and then 1 month for everyone to come out of hibernation. And there will be lots of businesses that will be adversely affected. Some may never come back, but there will be other businesses that will pick up new opportunities based on what they have been doing throughout this period. So I put on my Facebook page the other day that let me get the actual quotation, that your current situation is directly related to your past decisions. So if, depending on what the businesses are doing during this hunker down, will greatly impact on what happens in terms of customer behavior when these customers finally return. And if businesses are sleeping, if your startup is sleeping during this period and another business poaches your customers, they might give them a service that will be too good for them to turn down. So you may not have them again. So I agree with you, Dwain, entirely, but I'm mindful that we've completely overrun our time. So I wanted to thank our speakers, everyone. Kenneth, Muhangi, thank you very much for your insights. As always, very insightful from a policy point of view, from a corporate point of view. Thank you very much, and I follow the work that you guys are doing at KT Advocates and all the awards that you keep winning. So obviously, good job. Thank you very much. James Beronda, thank you very much for sparing time to give us insights into what's happening at UCC. And of course, Dr. Ruth Obaiko and Dennis Namara. I hope you guys get to link up and share some thoughts and ideas around your businesses. Dwain, thank you very much. And to all our viewers out there, we'll be doing this every Wednesday. I will let you guys know the theme for next Wednesday, but it will be the same time, 11 o'clock. And also wanted to thank my colleague, Eugene Nzeimana. Eugene, as you will notice on my Facebook page, we are streaming through his site. I tried to connect the Zoom with my Facebook Live account, and that didn't quite work out. So he very quickly put this together, and that's how I ended up hopping.
Dennis, I want Kenneth's contact.
I will share them. I'll share Kenneth's contacts to you guys.
Thanks. Please kindly share Dr. Ruth.
I will. So I will make the necessary connections for all of you guys to connect after the Zoom call.